July 17, 1944. Port Chicago Naval Magazine, California. 10:18 p.m. Seaman First Class Joseph Small stands on the Port Chicago pier, watching ammunition being loaded onto the SSEA Bryan. The ship already carries 4,606 tons of high explosives in its holds, 40-millimeter shells, depth charges, incendiaries, fragmentation bombs. Small has voiced concerns about the loading operation. No formal training. Officers running competitions between divisions. Fastest loading crew gets liberty. Damaged containers handled roughly. Live fuses mixed with inactive ordnance. The Navy's response: load faster. At 10:18 p.m., the SSEA Bryan detonates. The explosion registers 3.4 on the Richter scale. Both ships at the pier, the EA Bryan and SS Quinault Victory, are vaporized instantly. The blast crater extends 66 feet into the bay floor. Windows shatter in San Francisco, 48 miles away. 320 men die in 2 seconds. 202 are black sailors assigned to loading divisions. Not a single identifiable body is recovered from the blast epicenter. The explosion is felt across Northern California. Seismographs at Berkeley register the blast as an earthquake. Pilots flying near San Francisco see the mushroom cloud rising 12,000 feet. At Port Chicago Barracks, 1.5 miles away, surviving sailors are thrown from their bunks by the concussion. Buildings jump off foundations. Men don't know if they're being bombed by Japan or if the entire magazine has exploded. Joseph Small survived because he wasn't on the pier that night. 3 weeks later, the Navy orders him and other survivors back to loading ammunition under the same conditions that killed 320 men. Small refuses. 49 other sailors refuse with him. The Navy charges all 50 with mutiny, the most serious offense in naval law. The punishment? Execution by firing squad or hanging. Even if death sentences aren't imposed, conviction means dishonorable discharge, loss of all benefits, and decades in federal prison. The trial becomes the largest mass mutiny prosecution in U.S. naval history. Thurgood Marshall, then NAACP Special Counsel, observes the proceedings and writes to Navy Secretary James Forrestal, "This is not a mutiny trial. This is a trial of men who were terrorized into collective action by watching 320 of their comrades die, then being ordered back to the same work under identical conditions. All 50 are convicted. None are executed, but all receive 8 to 15 year sentences at hard labor and dishonorable discharges. They serve in federal prison while the Navy implements the safety changes survivors requested before refusing duty. This is the Port Chicago disaster and mutiny, the moment when black sailors refused to accept death as an acceptable cost of naval operations, and the institution prosecuted them for it. If you want military history about soldiers who stood up to unsafe conditions and faced prosecution for it, subscribe right now. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. The Port Chicago 50 still haven't received full exoneration 80 years later. Port Chicago Naval Magazine exists because of geography and wartime necessity. Located 30 miles northeast of San Francisco on Suisun Bay, the facility serves as the primary West Coast ammunition depot for the Pacific War. Every shell, bomb, and bullet that supports operations at Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa passes through installations like Port Chicago. The work is inherently dangerous. Loading high explosives onto ships requires precision, training, and strict safety protocols. Explosive ordnance is unstable. Rough handling, static electricity, metal striking metal can trigger detonations. The Navy assigns black sailors to do this work. In 1944, the Navy operates under strict segregation. Black sailors are restricted to the steward's branch, serving officers' meals, maintaining quarters, performing domestic duties. But the war demands more labor than stewards can provide. The Navy's solution? Assign black enlisted men to shore ammunition loading duty. At Port Chicago, 1,400 enlisted men work at the facility. 1,200 are black. All officers are white. The division is absolute. Black sailors load ammunition. White officers supervise from safe distances. No black sailor at Port Chicago holds rank above Seaman First Class, the equivalent of Army Corporal. No black sailor receives formal training in munitions handling. The loading process works like this. Boxcars deliver ammunition to the pier. Work crews unload crates onto the dock. Winch operators lift cargo into nets. Booms swing loads over ship holds. Riggers guide munitions into position. Hold crews stack and secure cargo. Each ship carries 4,000 to 9,000 tons of explosives. Loading takes days, running continuous shifts. The Navy provides no formal training. Seaman Robert Ruth, who survives the explosion, later testifies, "We had no training in the handling of ammunition. We were just told to load it. Nobody explained what we were handling or how dangerous it was." Officers turn loading into competition. They post tonnage numbers comparing divisions. Winners get 3-day Liberty passes. The implicit message: speed matters more than safety. Sailors notice problems immediately. Different ammunition types mixed in cargo nets. High explosives with incendiaries. Fuses already attached to shells being handled roughly. Damaged wooden crates with ordnance shifting inside. Metal tools dropped onto metal decks near explosives. No rubber-soled shoes to prevent static discharge. They report concerns. Officers respond, "Keep loading." This is the story of sailors who died because the Navy prioritized speed over safety, then prosecuted survivors who refused to die the same way. If you want military history about institutional failure and workers who stood up to it, subscribe right now. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. The Port Chicago disaster changed naval ammunition handling forever, but only after 320 men died. Percy Robinson describes the conditions. "We saw sparks when metal hit metal. We heard ammunition shifting in damaged crates. Officers told us to work faster. When we raised safety concerns, we were told to shut up and load." The competition system creates perverse incentives. Divisions that load faster get rewarded. Divisions that slow down for safety precautions face criticism, reduced liberty, extra duty. The message is clear. Your safety matters less than tonnage numbers. By July 1944, Port Chicago has loaded millions of tons without incident. The Navy interprets this as proof the system works. Sailors interpret it as luck running out. July 17, 1944, 10:18 p.m. The first explosion is small. Witnesses describe a flash at the pier. 6 seconds later, the main detonation occurs. The SSEA Bryan, carrying 4,606 tons of high explosives, detonates completely. The energy released equals 1,800 tons of TNT, 5 kilotons, roughly 1/3 the Hiroshima atomic bomb yield. The ship vaporizes. Not a single piece larger than a dinner plate is recovered. The SS Quinault Victory, tied alongside, disintegrates. The pier ceases to exist. The blast excavates a crater 66 feet deep and 300 feet wide in the bay floor. The shock wave travels through water, earth, and air. Seismographs in Nevada register the explosion. A pilot at 9,000 feet reports his plane lifting from the shock wave. In San Francisco, windows shatter in the financial district. Every man on both ships dies instantly. 320 total. 202 black enlisted sailors, 9 white officers, 98 white enlisted sailors and civilians, 7 white civilian train crew, 4 U.S. Maritime Service members. At the barracks, 1.5 miles away, sailors are thrown from bunks. Buildings jump off foundations. Men think it's an earthquake or Japanese attack. When they look toward the pier, the sky glows orange. A mushroom cloud rises into the night. The injured total 390, all from surrounding facilities. There are no wounded from the pier itself. Everyone there is dead. Medical personnel establish triage immediately, but there are no casualties to treat from the epicenter. The wounded suffer blast trauma, burns from secondary fires, cuts from flying glass, broken bones from concussion. Among survivors, the psychological impact is immediate and catastrophic. Joseph Small watched friends leave for the night shift hours earlier. Now they're simply erased, not wounded, not missing. Gone. The Navy's investigation begins immediately. Admiral Carlton Wright, commander of the 12th Naval District, arrives by morning. A court of inquiry convenes to determine cause. The investigation finds no definitive cause. The final report concludes, "The disaster was initiated by detonation of high explosive ammunition, resulting from rough handling, dropping of ammunition, or detonation of a defective projectile." Translation: someone dropped something, or something was already broken, and 4,606 tons of explosives detonated. The Court of Inquiry recommends improvements: formal training, stricter safety protocols, better equipment, rubber-soled shoes, careful cargo mixing. These recommendations are filed. The Navy issues no formal changes to Port Chicago operations or other ammunition depots. 3 weeks later, the Navy orders survivors back to loading ammunition. Survivors are transferred to Mare Island Naval Shipyard, where another ammunition depot operates. The facilities are similar to Port Chicago. The ships are the same. The procedures are identical. No additional training is provided. On August 9, 1944, 3 weeks after the explosion, survivors are ordered to resume loading ammunition. 258 black sailors board trucks to the loading pier. When they arrive, they refuse to work. Officers order them to begin loading. The men stand in formation, silent. Officers threaten charges. The men don't move. After several hours, officers returned them to barracks and confined them to base. Over the next few days, 208 of the 258 men agreed to return to loading duty. 50 do not. The Navy segregates these 50 men in a barge prison under armed guard. They face potential charges of mutiny under Article 22 of the Articles for the Government of the Navy, a capital offense punishable by death. Joseph Small becomes the leader by circumstance. The 50 men need someone to communicate with authorities. Small is articulate and respected. He becomes their spokesman. Small's position is clear. We're not refusing to work. We're refusing to load ammunition under the same conditions that killed 320 men. The Navy's position is equally clear. Refusing a direct order during wartime is mutiny. Maximum penalty, execution. On September 14, 1944, the Navy charges all 50 men with mutiny. The trial begins October 24th at Treasure Island Naval Base in San Francisco Bay. Lieutenant Commander James Coakley leads the prosecution. His case rests on 3 points. First, the men refused a direct order on August 9th. Second, the refusal was collective, not individual. 50 men acting in concert, which constitutes mutiny under naval law. Third, the men conspired together, discussed their decision, agreed on a course of action. Under naval law, this constitutes mutiny even without violence. The defense attorney is Lieutenant Gerald Veltman, a young white officer assigned to the case 30 days before trial. He has minimal trial experience and no familiarity with mutiny law. Veltman argues the men weren't refusing duty, they were requesting reassignment based on legitimate safety concerns. 3 weeks after watching 320 friends die, being ordered back to identical conditions constitutes cruel treatment. He argues the prosecution hasn't proven conspiracy. The men acted out of shared trauma and fear, not coordinated planning. The trial lasts 6 weeks. Joseph Small testifies on November 2nd. I was afraid of going back to loading ammunition. I saw what happened on July 17th. I saw the explosion. I knew men who died. When they ordered us back to do the same work, with no changes, no training, nothing different, I couldn't do it. I wasn't refusing to serve. I was refusing to die the same way my friends died. The prosecution asks, "Did you refuse a direct order?" Yes. Did you discuss this refusal with other men? Yes. Did you agree together not to load ammunition? We agreed we were afraid. We agreed we didn't think we should go back under the same conditions. This testimony, intended as explanation, serves as confession under naval law. Small admits refusing orders, discussing it with others, and acting collectively. Legally, this is mutiny.
The court-martial board consists of 7 officers, all white, all career Navy, none with ammunition loading experience. Their job is determining if the defendant's actions meet the legal definition of mutiny, not whether the defendant's fears were reasonable. On November 15, 1944, after 6 weeks of testimony, the board deliberates for 80 minutes. All 50 defendants are found guilty of mutiny. Sentences range from 8 to 15 years at hard labor. Every defendant receives dishonorable discharge. Joseph Small receives 15 years, the longest sentence. The convicted men are transferred to Terminal Island Federal Correctional Institution in Los Angeles. They begin serving sentences immediately. The NAACP launches a publicity campaign. Thurgood Marshall writes articles for the Crisis magazine detailing how the Navy created unsafe conditions, then criminalized men for objecting. Eleanor Roosevelt mentions the case in her My Day column, questioning why men traumatized by witnessing mass death face prison for expressing reasonable fear. The Navy rejects all appeals. Admiral Wright, who convened the court of inquiry after the explosion, reviews the convictions and affirms them. His reasoning? The defendants refused direct orders during wartime. Justification is irrelevant. Marshall appeals directly to Navy Secretary James Forrestal, requesting clemency or sentence commutation. He argues the trial was flawed, inadequate defense, improper jury composition, selective prosecution. In January 1946, 16 months after sentencing, Forrestal commutes the sentences. He reduces all to time served and orders the men released from Terminal Island. The commutation doesn't overturn convictions or acknowledge wrongdoing. The 50 men receive dishonorable discharges, disqualifying them from veterans' benefits, GI Bill education, VA home loans, military pensions, and most federal employment. Joseph Small returns to New Jersey. He finds work in a print shop. He never discusses Port Chicago publicly. When reporters contact him decades later, he declines interviews. The Navy learns different lessons from Port Chicago. In February 1945, 4 months after the convictions, the Navy establishes formal ammunition handling schools. Sailors receive structured training before assignment to loading duty. Competition systems are abolished. Safety protocols are standardized. These changes, implemented months after the trial, are exactly what Port Chicago survivors requested before refusing duty. In 1994, 50 years after the explosion, Congressman George Miller introduces legislation to exonerate the Port Chicago 50. The bill requests presidential pardon based on new understanding of trauma, discrimination, and unsafe conditions. The bill dies in committee. The Navy opposes it, arguing that overturning courts-martial sets dangerous precedent. The Department of Defense submits a statement. While we recognize the difficult circumstances these sailors faced, the convictions were legally sound under the military justice system of that era. In 2019, Congress passes legislation requesting the Navy review the Port Chicago 50 convictions for possible exoneration. The Navy conducts a review and issues findings in 2021. The Navy's conclusion? The convictions were legally correct under 1944 standards. The review acknowledges working conditions were unsafe, training was inadequate, and segregation was unjust. However, these factors don't invalidate the legal finding that defendants refused direct orders. The review recommends no action. The convictions stand. Representative Marc Desaulniers introduces new legislation in 2022, requesting presidential pardons. As of 2024, the legislation remains in committee. The Port Chicago 50 remain convicted mutineers under naval law. Their descendants cannot claim veterans' benefits. Their names carry dishonorable discharge status. The official National Park Service materials at Port Chicago Naval Magazine, National Memorial, describe the explosion in detail. A single paragraph mentions that some survivors were later involved in a mutiny trial.
No names, no context,